Oh, there we go. That's fine. Okay, let's begin there. And I will just say next to Cheryl, and then we'll go from there. But oops, not next yet. Not next yet. Let's start out at the front page there. Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm the executive director of the Northern Tornadoes Project, as Marian said. And the picture you see in front of you is a prime example of the kind of things we do, where there's a tornado that's torn through a forest in pretty much the middle of nowhere in Alberta. And we have found that using our remote sensing data. It's a tornado that would have been not found otherwise. So our mission is to try to find all the tornadoes across Canada, and we're finding hundreds that otherwise would not have been captured. But I'd like to actually start with a detailed look at another tornado event in particular. Next. And I'm calling this the Worlds Collide tornado, with apologies to Seinfeld. And as we go through, let me know if you recognize this tornado. So, you know, that of course, in a tornado talk, you want to actually see pictures of tornadoes. So this is all pictures of one tornado going through a certain neighborhood. And you know, it's obviously, if you see that coming down the street, you get a bit worried. These things, you know, you've got debris flinging out of them, and they're moving quite fast, clouds moving very fast. It's all very scary. And there's some videos of this tornado that do show the people are quite scared as this is coming through. Next. And here's some of the results of that damage, of that tornado. And you can see the damage in the subdivision, where you've got many houses that have been affected, lots of roof damage, a couple roofs off. In fact, if you look on the right side there's a roof and a wall off, and you can see a chest of drawers and a bed and a rocking chair that have not moved, but the wall is gone. So this is the kind of damage we see in suburban neighborhoods, particularly newer construction, unfortunately. But it's you know, it's sometimes you see stunning types of damage. Next. And if you haven't guessed, this is the Angus tornado from June 17th, 2014. And so my team was on the ground here determining what the damage path was. And we rate the damage based on the enhanced Fujita scale. So this goes from 0 to 5, with 0 being weak and 2 being fairly strong. And you can see with the contours here that the tornado did go, actually it started over in Camp Borden, just on the edge of that, and then started going eastward through these subdivisions. And you can see the areas in red there where there was enough damage to call it EF2. And that kept on going northeastward. And so the idea is to map out all of the damage in the worst hit areas, and then try to find the start and end and how wide these things are. So I progressed eastward and through farm fields and across different forests. So going back and forth across roads as I did so. Next slide. And I ended up at this familiar location, the entrance to the NVCA administration building. And in fact, go to the next slide. My wife was standing out in front of the building. So Heather worked for NVCA up until a few years ago. And this is where the worlds collide, because she's got her career and I've got my career, and they have never met before in such a way. But here I was following the path of this tornado, and there she was standing at the gate of NVCA saying, "Hey, we just got hit by a tornado yesterday." So that's the worlds collide. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the damage that was caused on the NVCA grounds there by the tornado. And Heather tells me that just a few hours previous, there were 100 or more children in that park. That luckily the storm did not happen then, and it was in later in the afternoon when these kinds of things typically happen. But you can imagine what may have happened if there had been an activity going on there when this went through. So on the right side is an aerial image of the same damage, and it just continued on and on. And if you go to the next slide, I think this shows the map. This was a length of 20.8 kilometers. It actually went into the southern part of Barrie. So quite a long tornado, but narrow, 300 meters wide. 3 injuries, I believe those were right in the town there. And losses of $30 million from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And again, rated, the worst damage was EF2. So that's the rating for the entire tornado was EF2 with maximum wind speeds of 220 kilometers per hour. And you can see it with the white circle where that NVCA building is. So it didn't miss the building by much, actually. And the tornado was basically went right through that area. And if you go to the next slide there, as I was doing the damage survey over in the Barrie area, I found this recycling bin, and it was from Bunting Street, which, if you know Angus, is where one of the subdivisions is. So about 20 kilometers away, that remaining piece of a recycling bin had traveled 20 kilometers or so from Angus to southern part of Barrie on the winds of this tornado. So these are the kind of things that can happen with a significant tornado such as the Angus tornado. Next slide. So I thought I'd take out where the tornadoes have been in the NVC area. So I just took the map of your CA and came up with some lat longs, just a square basically. And then our latest data is from 1991 to 2021. So this is data hot off the presses. We're just about to finish this new 30-year data set that I've extracted this from. So over this area, there have been 45 tornadoes in that period, an average of about 1.5 tornadoes per year. So it's a busy area as far as tornadoes go. And if you go to the next slide, you see where the Angus tornado fits in here back in 2014. And then there are 3 other EF2 tornadoes, if you go to the next slide, that have been in this area over that time period. Midland F2 back in 2010. There was one down in Maple, which is a little bit out of your area, but it fit into my square there, back in 2009. And then in 2013, we switched from the Fujita scale to the enhanced Fujita scale. I won't go into the details of what that means, but it's basically an improvement on characterizing the winds associated with the damage. And so the Barrie tornado is actually an EF2 or enhanced Fujita scale 2. And that was just this past year. And you're probably familiar with the damage it caused as it went through the south end of Barrie. Next slide. So to the Northern Tornadoes Project, this was a project that had we started out as a pilot project in 2017 and 2018, looking at whether we could find additional tornadoes in the forests of Northern Ontario that weren't picked out through the usual operational searches for these things. So could we find missing tornadoes? And in 2017 and then in 2018, we were so successful with this that we were very comfortable starting in 2019 to go Canada-wide with it. So now we are detecting, assessing, and documenting tornadoes right across the country, and it's one of the largest countries in the world, so it's a big job. And the idea is to advance our knowledge of the true tornado occurrence and risk in Canada. We have a pretty good idea what that is in populated areas because the damage gets reported and the damage gets looked at closely, but we really don't have a good handle on what the occurrence rate and risk is away from those populated areas. So that's what we're trying to fill in. There's some gaps there. So again, we're detecting, assessing, documenting each event, and then everything is open access, so it's made public on our website. And the idea is to build that new climatology and updated climatology of where, when, how strong, so that risk assessments can be made, and also tying into climate change. As we build these data sets, hopefully we'll be able to pull out some of the trends to see if climate change is having an impact on tornadoes in our area or not. And at the same time, we're doing research to try to improve how we detect and assess events, especially in areas that don't have trees and don't have buildings. Like the prairies is a large area where there's not a lot for tornadoes to hit. And also being able to predict these tornadoes so warnings are done better. Next slide. So this is really a community endeavor. It was founded by Western University and Impact WX, which is a social impact fund and a big donor to the project. That basically the project would not have existed without the donations from Impact WX. There's a core NTP team composed of meteorologists and wind engineers, and that's fairly unique in the world. Those are all on the left side there. We have an external research team that's also focused on longer term improvements to how we do things, and they're in the US and the UK and so on. But within Canada, we have strategic partnerships with the University of Manitoba, the Weather Network, Instant Weather, CatIQ. Again, these are the players in the severe weather community across Canada. We also work closely with Environment Canada, which is obviously the people that issue the warnings. There's emergency management that's becoming a bigger thing in Canada. It's a much bigger deal in the US. So we've engaged emergency managers and we're hoping to build relationships with them. And also we're working at crowdsourcing. So there's a lot of information about tornadoes that's on social media, and some of it is the only information out there. It might be the tornado occurred and only one person saw it and took a photo of it. And so we need all of that data. So we're making significant efforts at crowdsourcing and getting data from social media. And there's no shortage of enthusiasm across the country for this. It keeps building and building as people see the need for it and the excitement over building something like this. So it's been a great project to be involved with. Next slide. Okay, so I'll just talk about first the operational part of it, how our team does the day-to-day work of the Northern Tornadoes Project. If you go to the next slide. Again, we want event data coming at us from various sources. Initially, it's like I said, from social media and a lot of radar. So you see at top left there, this was someone who was seeing a tornado in real time in Manitoba and posting it on Twitter and tagging MB Storm. So that's something we would watch. We also have our own tags. People can just tag NTP_reports and then the reports come straight to us. And we get a lot of that as well. At bottom left there is a US tool that puts all kinds of radar products on maps that cross the border. And you can see some of the long tracks there of storms with hail and storms with rotation. And so looking at that, we know where storms have been and we can look for damage under those lines. And just at the center there is one radar image in particular with a tornado from 2018 that hit the Ottawa area, and very intense radar presentation there. And you can see that there's that hook shape, and that's what we tend to look for the chance of a tornado with this. And we did get an EF3 tornado with that particular tornado. If you go to the next slide. A lot of times though, the tornadoes are not occurring in urban areas, they're occurring out over forests. And we do have access to really high resolution satellite imagery from planet.com, down to 3 meters resolution, that allows us to see damage to forests. And they show up as these kind of scars. And you can see that scar there from the top left to the bottom right. And if it's a long, narrow scar like that, it's certainly a tornado, but sometimes the scars are more rounded, and those tend to be what we call downbursts, which are areas of wind from the thunderstorm that spread out on the ground and cause damage. So you can get quite different types of damage. Because of that, we sometimes need high resolution data than 3 meters to figure out whether it was a tornado or not. So if you go to the next slide, in those cases, we'll actually fly an aircraft over top of the damage, and you get 5 centimeter data from here. And as you can see, you start to be able to see each tree and how each tree is down, the patterns of tree fall. And that's the kind of thing we need to determine whether it was a tornado or a downburst. Next slide. And then if it occurs in an area that's accessible, the best thing we can do is conduct a ground survey where we get our engineers and meteorologists down right in the damage, taking photos of building connections and how far things have been thrown and what kind of a building it was, interviewing witnesses and so on. And then also flying drones where we could get even higher resolution data down below 2 centimeters, where you can basically see the details of every tree, what kind of species it is, what kind of ground cover there was, if it was saturated or not, all these important things for knowing how damage happens to trees in particular. So lots of remote sensing data used to track down the damage and assess it. Next slide. So our tornado assessment process is number one, we want to generate event maps. And this is where we gather all of the public reports on social media and the storm tracks we see on radar and try to put them all on a map so that all of our ground crews can see where all of the damage is. And when they're out in the field, the contact information is there, all of the relevant information is there. But we also have an app that was created for this project called Survey 123. And it's our first time we're able to go in the field with an app installed on an iPad, and all of the information you need to collect goes into this app. Even the pictures are generated from the app itself, the location, and I can watch the team working in real time from back at Western. So it's an amazing tool that we use now all the time when we do damage surveys. Next slide. So getting all this data allows the creation of what we call investigation maps. And these are used for the preliminary classification and intensity rating of tornadoes. So you can see an example of one of these on the right, where the blue dots are pictures that the ground crew took. The orange is where the drone has been and the images from the drone. And you can click on any of these and get the actual photo. So we often work collaboratively with Environment Canada on developing a preliminary assessment of what happened. And they usually want that within 24 to 48 hours and put that out on their circuits. That goes to the media, so everyone's satisfied that it's been looked at and we have an idea of what happened. But often events can be complicated and we have to look at the full suite of data to get a really good idea of what really happened, which we call it a final assessment, and that can take more time. And that's what NTP spends a lot of time with, and can take a week, can take 2 weeks, sometimes can take a couple months even if we have aircraft data that has to be processed. So it's much more than just a couple days that it used to be when I worked with Environment Canada. Now we're sometimes taking weeks or months to come to the final determination of what happened. Next slide. So how do we get that data out to the public? We have this interactive NTP event dashboard, and this is it's an ArcGIS product. If you're a GIS person, it's got an integrated GIS back end. You can see on the left where there's a lot of different filters, the time of year, the region, and so on. And along the top, you can see the totals. This is actually all of the events, tornadoes, downbursts, and so on, that NTP has captured from 2017 to 21. And you can see out of that, we've got 375 tornadoes that we've documented, and just coming up on 1,000 events. So it's been pretty busy. With this dashboard, you can choose an area, and that's say that circled red area in on the Alberta Saskatchewan border, and drill down. So go to the next slide. There you go. And so here we have what we're calling an event summary map. And that black arrow is the path of the tornado. The red dot there with the 2 that's where the worst damage is, and that it was rated EF2. You can see all the blue dots and the orange dots. Those again are all photos that you can click on. There's a couple areas where there's aerial imagery from drones that has been stitched together, and we can zoom in on that. That's that red dot again. So if you go to the next slide. So there's our zooming in on the drone data. And again, you can see all the details of every tree, where the cars were parked and all the stuff, and the routes that the ground survey crew took. Those are the lines on the roads. And again, we can drill down even further and click on one of the photo buttons there. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the photo that was taken at that particular location. So all of this data is, like I said, linked through a GIS system and available for the public to use how they like. So we'll be interested to see what ideas come out of the creative minds of the weather enthusiasts with all of this data out there. Next slide. This is an example of a really powerful tornado that occurred in Brooks Lake, Ontario, Northwest Ontario. It was rated EF2 because up in that area, the soil is so shallow on the Canadian Shield that we really can't go much higher than EF2 because they're so easy to blow down. But this is June 8th, 2020, and the length of this is 31.5 kilometers, and the width is over 2 kilometers, so 2.44 kilometers. Now, it's the widest tornado documented in Canada. And so we've got all of the aircraft aerial imagery from this. And you can see an example of a close-up of the aircraft aerial imagery, and it might be hard to make out, but the trees are actually down in a rotating pattern. We couldn't get a clearer picture of what a tornado would do in a forest than that. And if you zoom in, or if you go to the next slide, there's a zoom in of the analysis. So we have one of the engineers goes in to the high resolution imagery and does basically a directional analysis of how the trees are down. So it gives us an idea of what the patterns are so that we can discriminate between the tornado damage and the downburst damage. So in this case, the tornado damage is all the damage in red, and you can see the various directions that the trees were down. But all along the edges were downbursts, small downbursts called microbursts, and those are in blue. I'm not sure if you can see them or not, but we found 33 different microbursts that occurred along the edge of the tornado. So this is why we need to do these kind of longer analyses, is because the damage gets so complicated with these bigger tornadoes. Some of it's tornadic, some of it's downburst, and we have to pull each of them apart, and it's not an easy job. Next slide. So these are all of the NTP investigations and events in 2021, so the season we just concluded. So we did 400 investigations that resulted in 290 different events across the country. So there were 81 tornadoes over land, 19 that were over water, and those are mostly Great Lakes water spouts. So in total, 100 tornadoes across Canada, 95 downbursts, 44 what we call non-tornadic vortices. These are dust devils and gustnadoes and a bunch of different vortices that don't really count as tornadoes, but can still do weak damage. And then 51 events where with the data we had, we just couldn't tell if it was a tornado or a downburst. So lots of activity across the country, but you see most of it was in Ontario. Next slide. So we'll zoom in on that. So there was a record number of tornadoes in Ontario, 46 in Southern Ontario and 60 in Ontario in general, and a record number of strong tornadoes. So they were all EF2s, 16 of them in 2021. And you can see them, most of them are the ones in blue here. So the Barrie tornado was one of them, but there were more. There was one that came off of Lake Huron, a couple that were more inland, some that occurred on that day of the Barrie tornado, but way up in Algonquin Park. One of them actually hit a bunch of campers that were in the backcountry in Algonquin Park, and they had to be taken out of there to go to the hospital. So, it's quite a bit of tornado activity. We also had the third latest tornado on record in Ontario this year, which was November 21st near Newmarket. So, they're not only summer events. If we get a warm day with an active weather pattern late in the fall, even into November, you can certainly get a tornado. Next slide. And just some other extremes from this past season. It was you can see the picture there at left. This is a scary sight. It's a tornado as viewed from the Vancouver International Airport. I'm sure they didn't appreciate seeing that out their window. This was the first tornado to hit the Vancouver area since 1976, but it only caused EF0 damage, so it wasn't really strong, at least when it was over land. And it occurred in November, which is very rare. So again, a really rare event that happened out there. On the other end of the country, the first Nova Scotia tornadoes, actually two of them, since 1999, and the strongest Nova Scotia tornado at least till 1980 and probably beyond that. So that was an EF1. It took out a barn. Some other oddities, there was no tornado damage in Alberta this year. Just 3 tornadoes that we could tell from photographs that there were tornadoes, but they didn't hit anything. So we call them EF0 default. So that was unusual. But I think the most unusual was that in the period from mid-June to mid-August, which is the height of tornado season on the prairies, there were no tornadoes north of the 49th parallel across Canada. And that's probably unprecedented. It's hard to tell because as you get back into early records for tornadoes, it gets a bit dicey. There's not a lot of records, so it's hard to say with a lot of certainty what kind of record exists there. But certainly it's very unusual, and it had a lot to do with the drought that's been over the western part of the country for some time now, but also the wildfires sending smoke across the prairies and really kind of cutting down on the amount of sunlight getting to the surface that is needed to generate these thunderstorms that generate tornadoes. So you can see that, if climate change is causing these wildfires and heat domes, they're obviously having an impact on the things that cause tornadoes. So instead of tornadoes going up with climate change, they actually might go down. This is something that we'll be studying in the future. Next slide. And just a bit about the research that we do with Northern Tornadoes Project. Next slide. One is that we're looking at historical tornadoes. So we've looked at a lot of tornadoes through our project with satellite imagery, but the idea was, well, can we use satellite imagery in the past to try to find tornadoes that we didn't know existed in the past? So one of our staff and a PhD student actually went through old satellite imagery, and they identified more than 230 tornadoes that were not in the records back to the 1980s. And most of them were in Ontario and Quebec. You can see a lot of those dots there in the forests of Ontario and Quebec. So lots of tornado activity there through the years that had never been recorded. So another thing that we're doing with this kind of data is updating our national and Ontario tornado databases, and that's nearly done. So we'll have all kinds of new information for users of tornado data very soon. Next slide. Something that we can try to use to get a sense of how strong a tornado was and where it went in an area that doesn't have any trees and doesn't have a lot to hit, just crops, is satellite imagery that has got an IR channel or infrared channel on it, so you can actually pick out vegetative health with this channel. And if you look at the top right there, everything in red except the big red block at the top, that's showing you where there's been crop damage. And you can easily pick out that long, narrow path there heading off to the northeast, and that was an EF3 tornado in Manitoba. So we're hoping that we'll be able to pick out tornado intensity with the amount of vegetative damage that occurs and can be picked up through satellites. It can also be used, so this kind of crop damage can be used in forest and crops. We also are looking at how to reduce the amount of work that our staff does on counting the number of trees down and looking at the directions of trees by automating some of this. And you can see at bottom right where we've attempted to identify trees in an image showing a lot of trees down and get their direction. So we are making progress in this area, but it's really difficult and slow going. So we're still working there. We're also working on a new community radar processing app with instant weather. And this will give access to the general public on a subscription basis to a really nice radar app that's designed for the Canadian public, but it also will allow our project to develop in severe weather detection and nowcasting algorithms and improve the ability to forecast severe weather with these. Next slide. Building code improvements. We have a lot of engineers in our team. And it turns out that events with EF2 or EF3 damage, like the Barrie tornado, are really important for revealing serious issues with newer residential housing. You can see in the image at left there, that's a roof that's not very well attached to that house. It just kind of slid off, obviously not built quite properly. And on the right side, that isn't just a one-story house. That's a two-story house where the first story collapsed and the second story fell on it. Thankfully, no one was in it. But again, this is a serious building issue because when a tornado hits, the first thing that should go is the roof. You can see the roof is intact. So there's something going on with the construction of this building. So often in these areas, we find that construction is not really to code. There's gaps in the code. And the result is people out of their homes unnecessarily. So our team is promoting a number of inexpensive improvements, such as hurricane straps that will keep the roofs on better, longer roof nails, and so on. And actually, after the Barrie tornado, one of the houses that had the roof come off was a Barrie councillor. And so she's been working with council to try to implement a policy where hurricane straps should be used in new housing. So we're hoping that that makes a difference. So we do learn from all of these different events. Next slide. I think we're almost done here. Detecting trends. So this is a paper I worked on where I created a long-term data set, Ontario data set, going from 1875 to 2019. And again, the data set will be published soon. And one of the things we noticed is that if you look at all Ontario tornadoes over that period, which is the top slide, you can see that they're pretty rapidly increasing over time. And that gives you the impression that, hey, tornadoes are really on the increase. But if you look at just the strong tornadoes, the ones that anybody would have noticed no matter what period we were in as far as history, they haven't moved quite at all. There's maybe just a bit of an increase in strong tornadoes. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is that in the past, we were missing almost all of the weak tornadoes. They weren't being reported, they weren't being recorded. And as we go through time, we're doing a better job of finding those, either through social media, people with cell phone cameras, just better interest in severe weather after movies like Twister come out, and suddenly we start getting a lot more reports. So you can see that there's a human component in this database that we have to kind of filter out when we want to look at trends. And we did that for this study. If you go to the next slide, we only looked at the EF2 tornadoes, and we wanted to see if they were increasing later in the year, which was something that people have seem to notice that we're getting big tornadoes later and later in the year. And we did find a statistically significant increase which means that they are, in fact, occurring later in the year. And it's interesting because when we looked at neighboring Michigan and neighboring New York, they didn't have that same change. So something is happening in Southern Ontario that's causing our bigger tornadoes to instead happen not at the beginning of the year, not in the middle of summer, but more towards the end and even into the fall sometimes. So there's possible connections to climate change here. In particular, we know that the Great Lakes have warmed up quite a bit based on climate change, but we really don't have a strong connection there that we've researched. So this is all going to be future study. But this is the first study that has pointed to a robust trend in significant tornadoes anywhere in Canada. So it's a start. We have the data now, and we can start looking at these kinds of things. Next slide. And we just a few days ago introduced something new, the Northern Hail Project. So we have the Northern Tornadoes Project. Now we have the Northern Hail Project, and the idea here is to do what we're doing with tornadoes, but in the space of hail. So there's an insurance-funded program in Alberta that we're piggybacking on because it's a unique opportunity to look at hail. So we've got a 5-year field project plan to look at hail out in Alberta in the Calgary area. And like NTP, it would involve kind of the operational hail data collection and documentation, all of it being open data, plus research activities on top of that. And initially, those main research activities would be storm chasing, real-time collection of hailstones by a couple teams. So we don't want the teams to get right under the hail and have all of their windows broken out, but we want them to follow the storms and see how big the hail is behind them and then documenting that. So the kind of things we're looking at are stone diameter, the weight, the shape. You can see in the picture there, you can get pretty interesting shapes with hailstones. Wouldn't want that falling on your head. Density, hardness, and we also want to look at hail swaths. So how long and how wide, and we can see those in satellite imagery. And I should say that there are internships available right now for undergraduate students and even some senior high school students to go out and do that kind of work with us if you have any young students at home. Next slide. So just to summarize, we're really trying to improve the understanding of Canada's national tornado climatology, and we're doing that with NTP as we detect, assess, and document every tornado across Canada. Our website is at uwo.ca/NTP, and there's lots of material there. And the new Northern Hail Project will also use all of these cutting-edge technologies and techniques that we developed with NTP and do its part to improve the hail climatology of Canada. And at left there, yes, that's a picture that I took this past last summer of a really nice tornado. Didn't do hardly any damage, didn't hurt anybody, just out in the middle of the open fields of Saskatchewan. And it was a bit of a surprise that we got that one that day. But it was one of the tornadoes in Saskatchewan that happened, and then after that drought for 60 days. So it was special in that way, in that it was one of the last ones before the big drought. Okay.